This is Rosen Institute's Your Law Firm, where Lee Rosen and Ned Days cover management, marketing, finance, and new technologies for building the practice you deserve. Here's Lee Rosen.
It's good to be with you today from Siem Reap, Cambodia, where we're here with a friend to visit Angkor Wat, the ancient temple complex. This is our second visit to Angkor Wat, and it's great to see it again and to have the added perspective of seeing it with a friend. Our driver this time is the same guy that we rode with 9 years ago. It has really been terrific to catch up with him and hear stories of the changes in the area due to the tremendous growth. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is it is hot here. It is very hot. It was hot 9 years ago, and it is hot right now. Being immersed in all this history and all this heat, it is truly exhausting. So I'm not complaining that our visit here is a short one. We'll be on a plane before long, and I'll be enjoying the air conditioning.
It's time for your tech tip. My wife and I have entered that stage of life where our idea of an exciting Saturday night is watching television. Not normal people television, of course. I wouldn't want to be able to have a conversation about shared interests with other people. I've never seen Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, Succession, Severance, or White Lotus. No, we mostly use a streaming service called BritBox, full of old BBC shows. Truth be told, I find British television tolerable, but I got a discount code on a BritBox subscription, so we are treated to an endless stream of murder mysteries and Londoners buying houses out in the country. Lately, we've been watching a show where people with creative hobbies try to turn them into full-time jobs: ceramics, glass blowing, embroidering, woodworking, and other crafts. It's pretty formulaic, as these kinds of shows tend to be, and each episode focuses on participants crafting 3 items that exemplify what it is they want to sell: a volume piece, a high-end piece, and their favorite piece. Now, maybe it's because the British are more polite than we Americans are. Maybe it's poor form to discuss your wages on television. Maybe it's that the reality is selling decorative handmade spoons isn't a big enough market to provide a full-time living. But I'm often struck at how the hosts and participants dance around the metrics like profit and income per hour of work. They'll spend 10 hours on an item and then want to sell it for something like the equivalent of $200 or $20 per hour, and it's not like they're planning to work an 8-hour shift every day and be able to sell every piece immediately. By the time you take into account their materials, time spent going to the markets, packaging and shipping out orders, and then posting on social media, they might be making more like $5 an hour. And when we're talking about Christmas ornaments or decorative bowls or other physical widgets with a hard and fast price, it seems pretty easy to spot whether or not the profit margin or lack thereof makes sense. But when it comes to something like legal services, again and again and again, I see lawyers make 2 related mistakes: not looking at basic metrics like hours, case value, and number of clients, and undervaluing software and services that can actually provide a huge return on investment. Let's take a look at the first one. I have talked to lots of attorneys about how to start getting their practices moving in the direction they want, and there are some basic questions I ask all the time that almost never have answers because they aren't being tracked. What is your average case value? What is your retainer rate on consults? How much money are you owed that you don't expect to be able to collect? What percentage of your revenue goes to payroll? These are not complex metrics. They aren't difficult to figure out and calculate. As far as technology goes here, the calculator app on your phone and maybe a spreadsheet. I loathe math, but even I can figure this stuff out. But this is where too many attorneys turn into the artsy-fartsy guy making willow-weaving sculptures for people's yards, not realizing that they're earning the equivalent of minimum wage. And it's worth doing some basic calculations when you are making projections and goals for the firm, too. I talked to an attorney several years ago who had big dreams for an estate planning practice in a small town. When we dug into the nuts and bolts of the revenue he wanted to hit and what he thought he could charge with some back-of-the-napkin math, it was apparent that he would need to acquire about 2 new clients every single business day of the next year, the equivalent of something like 0.5% of the town's population every 365 days. It was clear that some recalibration was necessary, but you won't know if that's the situation you're in unless you run the numbers. And the second pitfall I mentioned is similar. We don't just undervalue our time, we often look at the cost of software and services that can actually make us a lot more productive and just immediately declare it too expensive or a bad value because it doesn't hit an arbitrary number of what we think it should cost. Now, don't get me wrong, I think we all feel like we have a few too many software subscriptions to keep track of, and there is plenty of stuff out there that's either reinventing functionality you already have available, way overpriced, or offering a solution in search of a problem. But we often jump to the conclusion that something isn't worth the cost, not based on looking at the numbers and calculating the time saving or additional services provided, but because of arbitrary ideas we have in our heads. I just spent about $50 on some cheap drapes off of Amazon. The ones in our guest room don't block quite enough light at night. I didn't even think about it. Maybe I'm just a flippant, bougie consumer, but debating the pros and cons of how necessary the drapes are when we're talking about $50 just didn't seem like it was worth it. But I will spend hours researching and comparing $10 USB cables, $20 fingernail clippers, and $5 vegetable peelers. I don't want to get scammed. I'm a savvy consumer, and unlike those rubes who end up with junk, I will sleep soundly knowing that I have the Greenbell G1205 nail clippers in my medicine cabinet. But in reality, I probably would have been better off just buying the first thing I saw and replacing it if it sucked, rather than spending hours I could have been doing something productive looking at reviews on the internet for things that are so inexpensive. But our brains are not nearly as calculating and rational as we would like to think. We stick expenses of various kinds into buckets based on what we think is important, or what we think other people care about, or based on what we as somewhat uninformed consumers believe. I know plenty of people who would have no problem ticking the box on a $5,000 car option that they will never use, but balk at a $100 a month software subscription that will save them and the team several hours per week and decide it's just not worth the cost. So don't use this as an excuse to go buy something you don't need, but do consider the value of your time and the value of the tools on offer. Understand what you're charging, what you are collecting, and what your team is actually generating to give you an idea of where to head next. And apply that same thinking the next time the price of something strikes you as a little too high. Is it actually going to deliver what it's promising? And if it does, will you be leaving money on the table by not taking advantage of the time savings and the productivity it offers? I'm Ned Days, and that's your tech tip.
And now for your moment of concise advice. Picture this. You are riding high after a stellar revenue month, and you're thinking that you have finally cracked the code. You've got it figured out. You are a master of the universe. But then, like clockwork, the next month hits, and suddenly you're scrambling again, scrambling to cover payroll, and you're maxing out credit cards just to keep things rolling along. And I'll tell you, that was me in the early years, lurching between feast and famine, back and forth. And I felt like I was absolutely at the mercy of luck or the market, that there was simply nothing I could do to keep a steady course. Well, the truth is that it wasn't luck, it wasn't the market, it was me. Revenues, they don't swing randomly, they're outputs. And outputs, they are always tied to inputs. When I let my focus slide, so did my revenues. When I stayed consistent, well, my revenues stabilized. They were consistent as well. I learned the hard way through sleepless nights and enough stress to land me in the hospital with a heart attack at age 37. I learned that I didn't just need a better business, I needed a better system. Unfortunately, systems aren't sexy. They weren't particularly interesting or attractive to me, but they work. Systems bring stability to the chaos of your business, and they are the secret to predictable growth. Here's what I mean. Back then, I started holding seminars for people that were going through family struggles. I would book a room and I would talk about the legal challenges of divorce that these people might face, and I would give them clarity about the options that they had. It was nothing fancy. It was just me and a room full of people who needed answers to their questions. Well, those seminars, they turned into a pipeline of clients. The folks who came to my seminars, many of them also came to my office ready to hire me because they'd already seen the value that I brought to their situation. I was consistent in delivering the seminars. I had a system, and the prospects, they were consistent at calling the law firm. During that period, while I was really stable and consistent with the seminars, I realized that I was too inconsistent with other things in my practice. I saw the benefit of the system, and I realized that I wasn't particularly systematic about very much. The seminars were working, but everything else was a bit of chaos. My follow-ups with prospective clients, chaos. My updates to existing clients, chaos. Just checking in with clients. It all happened when I found the time. It didn't happen in a systematic way, and that's no way to build trust. When I committed to regular client touch points, when I scheduled calls, well, like clockwork, everything shifted. When I kept in touch with my clients, when I did it systematically, referrals went up, complaints went down, revenue smoothed out. Why? Because consistency creates trust, and trust creates results. Consistency, approaching things systematically. It isn't just about clients or prospective clients. No, it's also about your team. I've seen issues like employees showing up late for work or associates not billing their time properly. And I can tell you this, one-to-one meetings, they are the antidote. When I made having these meetings each week, weekly meetings privately with each employee, well, things changed. These meetings, they weren't dramatic. They were just a focused, consistent check-in with each team member. They set the tone. They solved problems early. They encouraged accountability. These meetings, they were inputs that led consistently to outputs that I could count on. Outputs like better performance and higher engagement and fewer surprises. You know, the lesson here, it really is simple. If you want better outputs, focus on your inputs. Your business is a system, whether you treat it like one or not. The chaos that you may feel right now, that's just your system reflecting the inconsistency back at you. So start now. Start by picking one area where things feel shaky, whether it's marketing or client communication or team performance or cash flow. What is the input that you are neglecting? What is it that is missing? What would change if you showed up consistently in that area? If you're stuck, if you're not quite sure how to get started with this idea of being consistent with your inputs, well, try one of these things. Host a seminar. Teach what it is that you know to people who need to know it. Show them how you can solve their problems. Start doing it and be consistent about doing it. You'll see the impact. Or maybe reach out to your clients regularly as part of a system, not when you find the time. Do it on a set schedule. Or maybe it's your team. Set up weekly one-to-one meetings like I did with each of your team members. These actions, they seem small, but they're massive when done consistently because, and you've heard this 1,000 times, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And this business thing that we're doing, this isn't just about the money. It's not just about the business making a profit. It's also about peace of mind for you. When your systems run smoothly, when things are consistent, well, your life runs smoothly. You stop reacting. You start leading. You stop surviving. You start building. Consistency, it isn't glamorous, no, but it's powerful. If you'll show up day after day, well, then the results, they will follow. Build the system. Stick to it. Trust the process. That's your moment of concise advice. Wrapping up from Siem Reap, Cambodia, thanks for spending a few minutes with me and Ned today. We hope you have a great weekend and an even better week next week. Keep plugging away, moving forward, and getting things done. You're on the right track. You'll get there, I promise. We're all in this together, and together we build better practices through better marketing, better management, and better technology. Until next time, I'm Lee Rosen.
Thanks for listening to Your Law Firm. Subscribe to the Friday File at roseninstitute.com and join thousands of lawyers focused on working on, instead of in their practices. You'll find safe, successful, actionable approaches for transforming your firm. Sign up for free at roseninstitute.com.